Hi, welcome back to my studio and another session of sort of remote teaching. We've been throwing cylinders, trying to make tall objects, taller than wide. And today I wanted to touch base on the idea of making something with those cylinders. When you've got some cylinders completed, we want to keep them covered so they're fairly damp, not too dry. When they get too dry, they turn more white. These chips from a previous throwing have become too dry. Now they're called bone dry. What we want to do is catch them when the clay is leather hard. Leather hard has got some firmness to it. Still retains some moisture, and so when we make a handle, which is what I'm going to show you today, the moisture from the handle is not that different than the moisture of the cylinder you're putting them to. Because they closely match in moisture, they tend to join better. If one is drier, it'll draw the moisture out of the handle and it'll cleave, it'll separate. So the sooner we can get a handle onto a pot, once it's kind of firmed up, the better. Too long, we wait too long, we get a dry pot, the handle will dry and fall away because it doesn't get a good grip. So to begin with, when we're making a handle, when we're pulling a handle, which is what this is called, we need clay that's of the same quality, dry moisture. A little bit drier than the clay when we threw it is best. And then wedged up good and tight. We want to make sure there are no air bubbles in this, because as we draw on it and pull on it, if we hit an air pocket, it'll tear. So this clay has been wedged up. It's a little bit more firm than the clay was when I threw with it. And I've just sort of taken a little bit of time, as you can see, to pound it into kind of a long potato shape. I'm going to hold on to it by one end. I'm going to add some water and start drawing the clay downward in a slow motion to create a longer and longer handle, pulled handle. Now you can see there's, maybe you can see, there are specks in this. There we go, there's some. That's just redware clay that happened to get mixed in a little bit when I've set this down a few times. It's not a problem, not an issue. If there were a ton of redware in this, it would be a different temperature, and that could be problematic, but these little specks are of no consequence. So let's get started. Pulling a handle requires a hand to pull, a potato-shaped piece of clay that's been wedged tight, and water. Typically, I try to do this over the pot that I have the clay on. There's a lot of slop that runs down your arms. So you'll want to be covered up if you're sitting when you're doing this. Often it's not a bad idea to do this standing. So here we go. Get the clay a little bit wet all the way around. And I'm just going to start drawing downward with my hand. I'm moving it around, and because this clay is pretty darn firm, I really have to squeeze pretty hard to get things rolling. That'll be less the case once I get underway. I want to squeeze all the way past the end. If I stop beforehand, I start getting a knob, and then when I hit that knob, when I'm pulling, it'll tear the clay. So once this has started to get a little thinner, a little chunk of something in there, then I start concentrating on working this into, you can see, sort of a flattened curve, or a flattened pull. Two sides to it that are wider one way than the other. I'm pulling between the fat of my hand and the fat of the thumb. Compressing causes the clay to get squeezed downward. And the longer we go at this, the longer it should get. back and forth, long, slow, drawn edges. This is still very thick for a cup. This would be a good handle, or the good start for a handle that's for a pitcher. Too thick yet for a cup. You'll notice when you're pulling, it tends to kind of curve one way or another. You got to kind of battle that. And now I'm sort of squeezing both with a finger and my thumb between as I pull to get a little more compression all the way across. This is a bit like throwing. You're compressing the clay and using lubrication to get it to stretch to go where you want. Depending on the kind of handle you want, you can do a couple things. Some people like to stick their thumb in the center as they draw, and they begin to get a handle that has edges to it. I think you can see that. I'll pull on that a little more to accentuate the look. This clay is a little tougher than I wanted it. It's got a ways to go. There you can see it started curving, so now I want to get around it on the other side and get it to stretch evenly. Now I'm getting down where the clay has got a thickness that I think is closer to what I need. It's a little thick right here at the tip. That needs to be squeezed thinner. And I'm watching that I don't see cracks developing along from too much water. All right, now I'm running my thumb down the center of this to try to get soft ridges on the outside and kind of an interned part there. Get some length on this. Got a pretty big cup that I want to attach this to, so I'm going to need some length. You can see, getting kind of floppy. That's good. Okay, now that bottom tail concerns me a little bit. It's a little thick, so I'm going to take a moment and nip off, wet my blade here because I don't want it to stick. Gonna nip off a little of that, so I got something that's a little more sustained. All right, I think I've got this down about where I need it. Get that center curvature in there. I don't know if you could see the shadow of that or not. All right, what I'm going to do now I've got length on it, is I'm going to rest it on a table surface. Let me grab something. Well, this will have to do. Sorry to take so long. So I've got the handle, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it one more touch to kind of clean it up. I'm going to lay it down, and I'm going to cut it off at a place where I sort of think it's about right for width on that particular cup that I'm trying to add it to. So I'm going to just chop it off here and draw the clay away. And this is why you want to make sure your blade is wet, because it wants to stick. Let go. All right, so there's one. Gonna let it sit, get a little firm, then I'll set the arc of it after it's got a little bit of firmness to it. Let's try a different shaped handle. Back to squeezing the potato down. Starts out being pretty clumsy to begin with. I'm gonna go a little quicker this time, not talk so much. I'm sure you're all appreciative of that. We're pretty firm here with the pull. This clay is hard. And, straighten up that tip. Really kind of pressing hard with my thumb and the fat of my finger to get this guy to stretch. Oop. If the clay is soft and you go whipping around like I just did there, typically you'll break it. This stuff is quite firm, so I don't have as much trouble with that. Okay, I got the length that I want, and now I'm going to pinch. Let's get it within the camera range. I'm going to pinch with these two fingers, my thumb and my index finger, and I'm going to give a center rib. Structurally, give some strength to the center area. Let me look at it so I can see it on my side, and then I'll show you. I tend to like this gesture on my handles because it's not quite so sharp. Let's see if you can see this. There we go. There's a center ridge to that. Yeah, it's not really easy to see. Could be more distinguished, but it's getting a little thin. So I'm going to call that good. Wet my blade. Lay it on a clean surface. This is not all that clean. And cut it at a location that seems about right. And what I'll suggest to you is you can't make enough handles. This is a difficult task to get used to doing. Not a bad idea as a beginner or as a professional, just to pull handles, get used to it before you start worrying about getting them right for a cup. It's two completely different fights. First one is just getting a handle out. Another possibility for a handle when you're pulling it is just to make it round. If I just keep squeezing and rotating here, I'm going to begin to get a tubular shape, sort of a cylinder. Now I'm trying to get it to stretch. Got to keep in mind when this is all over said and done, you got to be able to bend the form that you've made into an arc. So less water is kind of helpful so it doesn't get too saturated and weaken. And what you're doing here is you're compressing. Continue to compress. Trying to get the knob taken away at the bottom. Have it a little bit thicker at the top than at the bottom. Doesn't seem like much is going on here. I'm not getting as thin as I'd like it to be. There we go. Now we're starting to get some stretch. Whoops. Alright, before that falls apart, I'm going to cut that off and save it for a cup as well. So, again, place to set it, blade wetted, and a cutoff. So that's 3 different kinds of handles, one with the center drive through it, a second one pinched between the fingers to create a center rib, and then a round tipped, a round shape for your handle. I'll get the cup ready for an attachment in the next bit of video.